Shabbat Shalom. We have a fourth Torah reading that we are going to be studying today. It is in Genesis 18 through 22. The Torah portion is called Yayeira, Va and Yira appeared. The visitors appear to Abraham in his tent and tell Sarah and Abraham that they're going to have a child in their old age. What I want to concentrate on is very serious today. It is an important scripture that deals with homosexuality, and it is where a lot of people get their theology against homosexuality from this scripture. So it's real important that we look into the fine details of what is meant here. We're going to digress from what we've been doing in chapters, the first reading, the second reading, and the third Torah portion readings. And we were looking at layers of meaning, and we were studying different principles of scriptures to get deeper meanings about our closeness to God. But in this particular scripture, it is real important that we get away from our traditional thinking of scripture and set that off to the side and look at and define words today. It's a principle of scripture that we must define our words before we can introduce our theology. So we're looking at the words for man in scripture, and there is the use of the word man here. As a matter of fact, it says that 3 men came to Abraham. And the word men there in 18:2, and Abraham looks up, and all of a sudden there he lifts his eyes up, and behold, there are men. The Hebrew word there is strong number 376, and it's a word we discussed before, ish and isha, the word for male and female. These 3 men visit Abraham and tell him he's going to have a child in his old age. Later on, when the visitors visit Sodom, because it's a horrible, sinful city, Abraham says, God, I want to intercede for this city. If there's 50 righteous, would you not destroy all the city if you just find 50 righteous? And God says, yeah, I'll do that. And then Abraham says, well, let me ask, maybe if there's only just 45. And God says, yeah, 45. Well, how about 40? And God says, I'd do it for 40. And he's bargaining, and he goes down to 30, and then he goes down to 20. And who goes down to look at the city, but now they're called angels or meleks, angels or messengers, and there's 2 of them now, and they go to Sodom, and they are being given hospitality by Abraham. And as they are eating a meal, and by the way, earlier they ate a meal of yogurt and beef, the 3 men that are mentioned, and it's not a kosher meal. So anyway, that's a whole different discussion in itself. But I want to concentrate on the word for man here. That these messengers that are now, these men that are now called messengers in Sodom, are eating with Abraham, and all of a sudden there's a mob of people, both young and old, it says, both young and old people come and want to break the door down so that we may know them. And most likely the word to know means sexual activity. The majority of the time that word does mean for sexual activity. As you remember or may not remember, they then are struck by blindness by the angels so that they can get Lot out of there and save his family, and then the whole place is destroyed by God with fire. You know what? If we look at this word for the men in the city that come around to want to have sex with the visitors, you will discover that the word there is not Adam, it's not humanity, or strong number 120. It's not the word for male and female, So the emphasis is not on sex. So it's not males with males. And that would be Hebrew number 376. But the number that Strong assigns this Hebrew word is number H582, or Hebrew number 582. Chaplain Strong was a chaplain, I believe, in the U.S. Army. And he, before personal computers were available, took every Hebrew word in Scripture from the first to the last. And he did this with the Greek scriptures as well. Took every word and assigned a number to them. And by the time we see the word man in Scripture, as we discussed before, the word for God created humanity, he assigned that as being the 120th word used in Scripture from Genesis 1 up to where that word is found. And that word means humanity. And then when he gets to the word God takes a man and separates them into male and female, he assigns Mr. Strong, or Chaplain Strong, assigns number 376 to that, and he defines all of these words. And again, I want to emphasize that in our reading today in Sodom, the people who come to have sex with these angels, and that's not even homosexuality. That's something else perverted. That's sex with angels. But anyway, I don't know what you would call that, but these mere mortals want to have sex with the visitors, the two angels, and the number Strong assigns that is H, meaning for Hebrew, H582, and he calls and defines it as Enosh, or people, or mortals, as opposed to divine. They didn't have a divine image if they're doing this, and they are, in one scripture in Psalms, the same word is used for the term of mortal sinners. So these are people that are evil to the very core, and the emphasis is not on sexual activity, or I think the Hebrew would have used the word for male and female, male on male, perverted sexual activity. Let me emphasize that perverted activity can take place in both the homosexual and heterosexual community. This is in fact a gang rape, and it is not the normative in either community. If you will remember a movie back in the 1980s that starred Jodie Foster, who played a waitress in a restaurant, and she was gang raped in the restaurant as others cheered on, and the movie goes on, and the perpetrators got off. Later on, they were convicted of lesser crimes. But gang rape is unacceptable in the homosexual or heterosexual community. I want to emphasize that. So we have to define our terms. We also have to realize that a new principle I want to introduce is that unclear scriptures are defined by clear scriptures. And in Ezekiel 16:49, we read this statement. Ezekiel 16:49, it says, "Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore, I did away with them, as you have seen." That's Ezekiel 16:49. So this clear passage listing the sins of Sodom are telling you exactly what the sins of Sodom are. Let the clear define the unclear, and not the other way around. Let me expose to you what our sages say the sin of Sodom is. The Hakayim, he commentates on Genesis, and he says that the wickedness of the Sodomites are in a class by itself. And the wickedness not only includes the metaphysical, but idolatry. There are moral and ethical wickedness in their relationships to their fellow human beings. Here is another exposure of our sages, what they say about the sins of Sodom. They go into the different words that are listed in detail, and I won't belabor you with them, but they say that there are a multitude of negative sins here, and our sages in Sanhedrin 109, and this is the Rabbeinu Baya, who's commentating on the Sanhedrin 109, who says that the sins involved here are money and associated with sins against the destitute. And then finally, I'd like to read the Sanhedrin 109 as quoted by Rabbeinu Bahu again in a midrash, which says that there was a girl that was feeding the poor in Sodom, and when the town people, these what was the Hebrew number that was associated with it? These 580. It'll come to me when I get to the scripture, but 582. These mortals, these sinners, when they found out that the little girl was feeding a destitute person who needed food and drink, they took the little girl and they placed her on a roof, doused her with honey, and let the bees come and stung her to death. This was a class of sin all on its own. And as you know, Ezekiel 16 says these are the sins of Sodom. They did not help the poor and the needy. That's my emphasis today. We need to define terms. When we see the word man in our normal, I'm going to say King James Version, which most of you probably read, or some other version, the word is not usually just man. Is it humanity? Is it male or female? Does it refer to something else? Because later on we're going to see yet another word for man when it talks about man shall not lie with man. That will be interesting when we find another word for man there, and we need to be clear what that term is. I hope you enjoyed this study. I hope you have a really good Shabbat. And I like to leave on a positive note. The positive note for me is that we do have the ability in our great country to help the needy. I'm not going to toot my own horn here, but we are certainly blessed. And I thank the Lord for giving me 65 years and still going strong and able to give and help in my own local ways. And I hope you will do the same. Shabbat Shalom.